Good morning, and thank you very much for turning up this morning. I did say that we're going to have a very interesting speaker today. I'm going to give him a quick introduction. I don't want to take up any of his time. But Peter Jefferey is an executive manager at Grant Ready. So let me tell you a little bit about him and why he's so important to our current learnings in engineering enterprise. So Peter is a specialist in assisting organisations to achieve their goals and successfully deliver complex programs that require state and federal government funding and extensive community engagement. All things you guys are going to be engaged in or have already been engaged in. He assists community growth through education assistance with grant winning for councils, businesses, non-for-profits, community groups, social enterprises. Peter has had significant success with funding applications for programs under his management, achieving an 85% success rate, and I can tell you that's extremely high, and winning over $680,000 in 1 year whilst representing a Victorian-based social enterprise. Peter has won national awards for economic development programs involving government funding and partnerships across the 3 tiers. He has also been consulting by the state government to help influence policy and develop cross-sector community committees. So please join me in welcoming Peter Jefferey.
Thanks, Eddie. That makes me sound really good. I'm pretty happy with that. It's interesting how your achievements over the years, they just accumulate. It's not as though you go out and do all of that in one hit, but just bit by bit you'll chunk it up and build your resume. Today we're talking about, yes, grants and how to apply for funding, but there's a few other things that I'd like to talk about today, and I'll just quickly run through the agenda. For those up the back who may not be able to see the small font, it doesn't stay small font for the whole time. But basically, we're going through the basics of grants, and really today I want to give you the flavour and an understanding of the background of how the funding process and system works. I don't really want to give you the slides, so I'd like you to take notes. So just keep in mind a slide pack. It's not going to be a proverbial, here's the slide pack, off you go and study it or put it on the shelf and forget about it. Today I really do want you to take down some key notes that you find interesting for you. So there's a 4-step process that we promote at Grant Ready around how to approach funding and how to actually identify money, and then how to actually track and record that money, and how to strategise to approach the grant system, if you like. I'll run through that. I'll pick apart an example grant, and I think Eddie and some of your colleagues, Eddie, might be interested in this grant I'm about to pick apart. I'll tell you a little bit more about the pitch and a bit of an overview around not just funding, but also when you go into the private sector, your senior staff are going to want to be collecting the best information and ideas from the coalface, which will be you. You'll feel passionately about something and you'll want to pitch an idea to your boss. Long story short, how do you do that? I'm going to just roughly cover that over today as well. I'm going to then segue into agile process, and this will be relevant for your industries, around best practice business processes and systems. I've just gotten out of a 2-day course, death by PowerPoint, 350 slides on Scrum training and Scrum processes, which is an agile system. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll have lots of time for question and answers. So I'll just keep a, Andrew, if you can keep a clock going just so I can see, that'd be great. Let's see a clock right here. Just to make sure I keep on time. So I'll be talking for the next sort of 30 or so minutes, and then we'll go into question and answers and we'll just pick it all apart. Righto, so quick question, show of hands or just yell it out, I don't mind. Any idea how much funding is currently available for Australian businesses collectively through grant or funding programs?
Is it 2.7 billion?
Close-ish. Anyone else? The reason I say close-ish is because I've got the B right, billion.
Yeah. So 1.7.
5 billion.
5, higher.
10.
Okay, just over $50 billion for businesses. Okay, we know that it's a really hard figure to track because grant funding programs are coming in and out of season. But in general, it can be as close or as high as $70 billion for both businesses and community groups across Australia every year, put on the table and taken off the table if nobody applies for it. So basically what we're saying is the government, both federal and state, predominantly that's where a good portion of the funding is coming from. But basically, if nobody applies for it, it's just taken back off the table and put back out again next year. Grants aren't always what they seem. So what you find is we've got rebates, duty concession, we've got tax credits, vouchers, interest-free loans, and subsidised assistance. And keep in mind, grants are often dollar for dollar match, 1 for 2 or 1 for 3. They basically, the funding or the program provider want to see you hitchhiking with your thumb out and walking that direction. They don't want to just give you a gift. They want to make sure that they're aligning with your strategic plan and direction as a business, and that they're actually going to impact your business in a positive manner that wouldn't have been impacted otherwise. In other words, if you're going to invest $5 million into an upgrade of facilities that will create 200 extra jobs, if you're going to do that anyway, well, is it really worthwhile for them to give you a bit of a helping hand? Well, probably not. They want to help people who probably aren't going to get there in the first instance, and then be the heroes because they've created 200 jobs. Does that make sense? Imagine it's your money. That's the best way to put it. At the moment, we're talking federally about just over $1,500 grants for businesses in Australia. In Victoria, it's about 730 grants for Victorian businesses. So you can see and tell that state by state, you've got state funding programs and you've got national programs. National programs, generally anyone can apply for them from around the country, and state specific. So we don't necessarily, you can't apply for grants in Queensland that are specific for Queensland businesses if you're in Victoria. Generally, this is pretty important. Funding programs are based at the moment around innovation, technology, film, research, regional development and training. Can you tell me what the theme is behind all of those? I'll just go back to it. Innovation, research, technology.
Jobs.
Yes, good call. There's another word I'm looking for. Just yell it out.
Community.
Community, to a degree, but
Future-oriented stuff?
yeah, you're getting close. Really hot, really hot. Anyone else? Education, yes. Innovation is the word I'm looking for. Why? You'll find funding programs emulate government policy and strategy. In other words, we went through a global financial crisis, and we knew coming out of that, the way to bolster ourselves against another global financial crisis is to be a clever country. Have IP here, and we're winners. That's basically the long story short. So you're finding a lot of money being pushed into innovative jobs. Do you think a cafe owner would find a grant here based off this?
Not really.
Correct, not really. Maybe a bit of training, maybe a little bit of mentoring or business coaching, but not really. The money is there for clever businesses. Clever businesses, innovative, experimental. That's where they want to push the money, for clever, high worth jobs that create huge economic impact. Does that make sense? Yep, great. So how does it all work? The feds, they're the ones with the bucks. It filters down to states, and basically the states come up with the funding program. So the federal government will say, righto, we'd like to boost innovation in our country. We're going to dedicate a bucket of money, around 500 million to that. States, up to you how you distribute that to support innovation. And the states get together and they say, righto, innovation, what's important for our neck of the woods? For Victoria, what's important for innovation for us? Let's brainstorm this, talk to ministers, talk to the public, righto, let's gather the information. Now we'll develop a program that's specific to us that will help us build innovation. That's predominantly how it works, as a rough measure. So you'll find that typically the feds only have a few grants, 355. Some of them aren't even grants. They're just coming out and saying, we're going to do this. By the way, we've got another 300 grants that we're pushing out, and innovation is one of them. Then the states, they come up, and you can imagine each state in Australia come up with their own programs. There's plenty more state programs of a smaller amount, basically divvying up that money. Make sense? Heads are broadly nodding. Yes, good. We'll go on. Four key principles that we find. A lot of people promote write the grant, win the grant, report on the grant. Write the grant, win the grant, report on the grant. Write the grant, win the grant, report on the grant. That's what is promoted time and time again. What people forget is strategize. Learn the lay of the land. So basically get your thinking right. What we're talking about here is understand the program and the funding provider. If you understand how they think, you've got a better chance of blending in with what they're trying to offer and understanding what they're trying to offer, and a better chance of writing a submission that's going to be attractive. What we want to do is make sure that you don't deviate from your business as usual to grab the money. The money's a nice little attraction over here, the shiny glossy thing. We could grab at it. But essentially we want to find funding that aligns with your strategic direction as a business when you enter the business sector. Make sense? Yep. Heads nodding? Yep. Good. Everyone's still awake? Fantastic. If you've got a question, just chuck it out there, please. Somebody else is probably thinking the same thing as you. So,
I've got a quick
yeah,
question.
go.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by think right?
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm talking about there is when you find a funding program, I'll give you an example. For the not-for-profit sector, it's the example I'm thinking of. I actually rang, and something we promote, and I'll get into this later, but I rang the funding provider and I said, hi, I'm thinking about applying for your program. I've got this project as an idea. And they said, thank God you rang. We're really struggling giving away this money. I said, well, you're kidding. This is during the global financial crisis. We're backed by a foundation who are a family who own a lot of quarries. Not mines, quarries. They've got a lot of money and we're struggling to give it away, and everyone thinks we don't have money because it's a global financial crisis, and all the other funding programs are pulling in when we're actually dishing out. What a great response. I thought, well, here I am. Yeah, I've got a great program for you. So off I went and I rambled. On and on I went, yeah, explaining my program. Oh, great, built the relationship, built the rapport. Guess what? We won the money. Now, I didn't know that until I actually spoke to the funding provider, and guess what happened to my grant application funding amount? Just went up a little bit. No problem. I understood the program and the funding provider. Get your thinking right around which programs and funding providers are going to align with your vision and your direction. And make sure that you start identifying some key dates of when these funding programs come in and out of season, because often, like I was saying before, they're put on the table, taken away again if nobody applies for it. Put back out on the table next year, taken away again. So unless somebody grabs it, it's not used. Does that explain that question?
Yeah.
A little bit more, yeah. Grant strategy. Start developing a bit of a calendar and strategizing for what funding might be coming up. So as a student at La Trobe, how many of you know what funding is available to you as a student right now from La Trobe University? No hands are going up. Why not? Do you know that there's $3,000 to $5,000 grants available for you right now to apply for, potentially? There's silence. Eddie, yeah.
I want to ask a question. Who's part of YIC? Who's part of the Young Engineers Club? Who's actually chairing it or presiding over it? Who's the president? Okay, so I'm sure that he knows what funding's available from the student union. You guys need to be aware of it as well. It's free money.
Yeah. Yeah. We've thanks, Eddie, for bringing up the free money point, because to a degree, it's money for you to access, but you will have to work for it. In other words, you'll have to write the application, and you'll probably have to acquit that funding. In other words, you'll have to provide a report and say, this is what I did with your money. But keep that in mind. It is some of the easiest money you'll be able to access. So modern day business models include funding as an opportunity, or grant programs, and volunteering. There's a lot of volunteers out there from youth and from senior. There's a lot of experienced people out there who are out of work who want to volunteer to a business or a cause. So keep those in mind. Write the grants. Now, this is where we basically get into some technicalities around how to actually appeal to the funding provider. And writing grants is a specialised field with wordsmithing. I'll get a little bit into some bullet points around specifics that will give you some hot tips about writing grants. But I can guarantee you, when you go to your employer and you start talking about funding opportunities, you're head and shoulders above the mentality of most businesses in Australia. And I'll unpack a little bit more of that later on as we go. Reporting well, as I mentioned, most funding programs will ask you to report or acquit the funding. In other words, show us what you've done with the money. Funding programs, typically, if they're big bucks, talking 100,000 plus, they're provided to you in incremental stages. So in other words, stage 1, we give you $50,000. Stage 2, another 25. Stage 3, the final 25. and you report on each stage to demonstrate that you're tracking well, you're delivering what you promised, etc., etc. Make sense? We'll move on. So, how many grants can you actually get? Well, this is a really interesting conversation that Eddie and I are having just before this session. There's no one funding platform that aggregates all of the grant funding streams in one spot until now. And this is not meant to be a sales pitch, but this is my background and Grant Guru. So Grant Guru, feel free to Google it. It's the Trivago for the hotel industry of the grant world. Make sense? You can compare grants, you can search for grants, you can find exactly what's available for you. So I'll tell you what, if you're currently working with somebody, when I say a business owner, preferably within your field of preference. So in other words, if you're working at a retail store, it may not be as applicable, but if you're working with somebody that's aligned with your future career direction, they're going to be really interested in hearing about this, in the sense that you might come to them and do a quick search and say, hey, did you know about these funding opportunities? I've just done a quick dump into a Word doc, and here they are. I'm pretty sure that within 20 minutes you'll identify 4 or 5 funding streams that might be applicable for your business. Now, what business owner would not want to know about that? Not me. These guys, we had a client who was working with the group that produce cranberry juice. They do this day in, day out. They produce cranberry juice. A lot of businesses don't recognise necessarily how clever they are. We had a tour of a factory, and basically the group that we're working with helped develop the process to extract the juice from cranberries. And they basically came up with a new process that actually split the fruit instead of crushing the fruit. Sounds pretty basic, but when we were touring the factory, they said, oh yeah, we're basically buzzing them with questions, probing questions. So why are you doing that? What's the benefit of that? And tell us a little bit more about that. And they basically, as a throwaway comment, they said, oh, yeah, it saves a bit of water. And we said, oh, how much water? Turns out there was a $2 million sustainability grant in it for them, and they won it for water, saving water. So through the whole process, they actually impacted the industry that much with their new process that they won the substantial grant for a throwaway comment about saving water, and it was a sustainability grant. Typically, businesses are looking for money for equipment. That's the number one. Wages, number two, but grants for wages are very, very rare. So essentially, this is a really good example. Businesses don't necessarily think creatively enough about the grant world. There's a number of different buzzwords I'm looking for when I go on a factory tour. I'm looking for things such as saving energy. I'm looking for things such as new processes, new systems, or lean thinking. In other words, reducing waste. I'm looking for any throwaway comment they've got about new stuff that they're doing. A business just recently in Bendigo have developed a bracket, customized, 100% customized bracket to install their equipment onto that they sell, which is a patented product. So they go out and install on the outside of buildings cladding. This product basically requires a specific bracket so that installation is much easier for the installer. Quick, simple install and click. Now, this bracket hadn't been produced anywhere else, and they're eligible for a funding rebate on that money that they've spent to produce that bracket. They didn't even think about it. They just went, well, that's business as usual. Just make the bracket. We need the bracket. Make a bracket. No, there's opportunity there. Have I told you this already? I think I have. Quick, first one with the hand in the air. Roughly, how many businesses or how many grants are available for Australian businesses?
1,700.
Yes, I'll give you that. It's 1,500, just over 1,500. Testing, how many people are awake? I've been in your seat before. I know the deal. Okay, next. Let's pick this apart. Advanced Manufacturing Early Stage Research Fund. A lovely long acronym. AMESRF. It does roll off the tongue. Say that 10 times quickly.
No, it's Amy Surf. It's just got a U.
Excellent. There's the acronym. Good invention. We're going to pick this grant apart, and I'll just run you through the thought process I have to try and identify whether this funding is applicable for a particular business or not. Lovely, got lots of time. So basically, Grant Guru being the one-stop shop makes it easy just to identify in a uniform manner what funding is available with a 2-sentence précis and then some basic criteria on the side. Start date, application close date, maximum amount for funding program, sometimes typical amount of or average amount of funding to be applied for. Is this easy to write? Is it hard to write? Some basics. The 2-sentence précis is really important because you can quickly get a flash. Is this applicable? Is it not? Then when you click that funding program, you get a bit more detail about what the funding program is all about. So this, for the guys up the back, and you are all gents, excuse me, I'll just read this out for you if you like. Aims to support small-scale pilot research projects, obviously for advanced manufacturing. Grants between 100 and 400,000. Available 1-to-1 ratio, so we match your dollar funding, in other words. Projects need to be completed in 12 months. This is typical. Total funding pool of 4 million over 4 years. And we know this is a national grant. So it gives you an idea broadly. You can start doing a bit of basic mathematical calculation. Typically, how much on average are people going to be applying for? How much chance do you think I might have of getting this? Now, remember the next step I said, well, it's actually the first step, think right. And that was a great question over here. How do you think right? Get to know the funding program provider. So the next thing I think of is, who's giving out this money? Who is this AMES surf person? I need to know a bit more about them. They are basically a quasi-government or an associated government body. What they do is they support the feds, the federal government, with that industry. So in other words, the federal government and most state governments, they recognise that they're not the experts in most fields. So they'll align with a body who will help them administer and distribute the funding. Does that make sense? In other words, we know the industry, we know the sector, we know what's good and not so good, what will work, what won't work. So let us align with you to distribute the money. So that's who these guys are. Key plank of the Australian government's Industry Growth Centres initiative. So the feds have said, we'll set up a number of industry growth centres around Australia to help us identify and distribute this funding to appropriate businesses. Make sense? Good, heads are nodding, good, like to see it. So, in particular, they're focusing on 6 sectors. These ones here: advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, food and agribusiness, med, mining, oil, gas, energy and resources. Cool? So to be eligible, I'm reading further into the detail here. And I'll come back to reading into the detail again, probably time and time again, because it's really important. To be eligible, applicants must. Can you read that up the back? Good. I won't talk to the slide. I'll just keep going. So there'll be certain criteria that will be applicable for you as an applicant to apply for this funding. That criteria needs to be met. If you fall out of that criteria, not applicable. The number of people who apply when they're not actually applicable is ridiculous. 30% of applications get wiped off the table, in most cases, immediately, because they're not applicable. They haven't read the guidelines, they haven't paid attention to the fine print. So read the guidelines, and read the guidelines again is my advice to you. The second is to call the funding provider and talk to them, if you can, about your project with some intelligent questions after you've read the guidelines and you've figured out what some intelligent questions might be. Nothing worse than ringing up and saying, "G'day, yeah, I just thought I'd call you and just have a chat about the funding program. Got an idea, what do you reckon?" You get that day in, day out as a distributor of funding money. It's not mind-numbing. What really appeals to you is when someone rings up with some intelligent questions about your program and they clearly understand what your program's all about. You sit there and you think, on your day-to-day, would you appreciate a phone call from someone who's clued in, understands your space, and has something really attractive for you? Oh, straight away you sit up and go, "Great, made my day. Love to talk more about this, and I'm looking forward to seeing your application. By the way, what's it called?" Think of a clever name. Don't think of something boring and basic. And I'll get to that again. Righto, everyone read that? To be eligible? Great. Reading into the fine print even further. Eligible expenditure. There's one word I've highlighted there: salaries. This is rare, and this is why I'm saying Eddie's probably going to get on the phone to his colleagues after this. "Hey, do you know about this grant?" Salaries. Salaries and consulting fees directly related to the activities in the project. You can apply for that. That's rare. Like this, at the start I said salaries, typically no. You don't get salary money. It's not normal. This is rare. I'm moving on. Everyone happy? So, go over the fine print. You'll also notice that if you get money from any other state or federal government body, it's not applicable to this funding program. In other words, you're not going to double dip. Make sense? So if you get a grant from somebody else and you put that in your project budget and say, I've got 50,000 coming in from so-and-so, we're chipping in 50,000 and we're applying for another 100,000 from you guys, they're going to take that 50,000 that you're getting from a state or federal government department and say, no, not actually applicable. You're double dipping here. Does that make sense? Just be wary of that. Really good to have partners though. If you can get partners, especially partners generally mean money, right? So just substitute the word. Really good, because funding program providers get a sense of confidence there. They see that they're not in it alone. They're mitigating their risk, and that's a really good thing to do. So if you can, do it. But in this case, they're saying if it's another state or federal government department, you're double dipping. Naughty, naughty. It's a fair call.
Well, you just can't use it. You just can't use it in your matched money.
Correct.
You still have it.
Correct.
You just can't use it as the match.
Yes. Yeah. So typically, you would probably apply for another project or through that funding program you've identified for another project that you're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that the funding programs are heading now, they used to be read our criteria and guidelines, apply with a full application to our funding program. Our body of panellists will sit there and assess every application that's about 15 pages thick, and then come back to you. So in other words, you're investing a lot of time and energy into writing an application for a funding program. Now the way that the system's starting to work, not everyone, but they're starting to go into this platform of a one-page expression of interest form, which makes it really easy for you. And what you'll find is the one-page expression of interest are generally some really basic questions. Tell us in no more than 500 words what your program's about. Ringing a bell. Give us your name, your details, your contact details, your address, your business name, etc. So what they're doing with that one-page application is they're pulling it across the desk and they're saying, yeah, nah, that side, that side. Then they contact you and say, right, write a full application for us, please. We think you're in the ballpark. Does that make sense? So it saves everyone's time. But what they're actually doing in the background as well is they're going, who's this business? Let's Google them. Are they creditable? How long have they been in business? How many staff do they have? What's their turnover roughly? Do we want to risk in investing in them? That's their call. And that's for you to demonstrate to them that you're worthy. So this expression of interest, the typical layout, I was just explaining, project title, make it creative. Don't make it cheesy, but make it creative. It's nothing worse than the Bendigo Regional Development Program for sport. What does that mean? And also, that's just boring as batshit. So think of something a little bit more creative, and think of something that's applicable, and use buzzwords. In other words, I might think of something that's a little bit more appropriate on the same lines as, and I'm thinking off the bat here, no pun intended, because we go with the sports theme. Bendigo's women in sports buzzword at the moment, pushing women in sport. Gala event. Don't know. Something along those lines. It's a little bit more eye-catching, a little bit more creative. Put yourself in the judge's shoes. You've got 70 applications for a funding program. You've got to decide yes or no, what's in, what's out, very quickly, and then you've got to request a full application. What's going to stand out against all the others? Generally, it's the name first that they're reading. So they've asked you for 500 words and a project outline. That name is going to hinge heavily off your success. Okay, it's got to be easy to understand, it's got to be clever, it's got to be catchy, it's got to be on brand, on trend, and it's got to align with their flavour of the month, so to speak, what are they pushing in government or the funding body in concern? What are they pushing? What's their core belief? So the funding title name does take quite a bit of research and thought to actually come up with a clever, appropriate, catchy name. Fair call? It's almost reverse engineer it. Write the application first and then think about how you actually condense that into 3 or 4 words. Everyone got that? Yep, I wasn't talking to it. I've just highlighted one. Merit criterion 3. Advanced characteristics. What's that? So I had to know. I had to sort of follow that a little bit further. When I clicked to find out a little bit more about criterion 3, this popped up mid-sentence. I thought, what? You've got to be kidding me. Success in Australian manufacturing is less about what you make and more about how you run your business. Who's heard of that before? Is that typical?
Nope.
It's becoming more and more the norm because they want to see businesses who are clever, doing it well, and can deliver. So, gone are the days of the big entities such as IBM, etc., saying, "Can we grab a little bit of cash for that project over there?" They're basically saying, "Well, how are you going to deliver it? How are you going to demonstrate you actually got the smarts? We know you're a big organisation, but what resources are you going to put behind it? And how many partners are you going to get to deliver that? In other words, how many votes are we going to win?"